History made in Syria. Turning a new page. Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, flees the country. Assad belongs to the second generation of an autocratic family dynasty that held power in Syria for more than 5 decades. Now, decades later, Assad's escaping Syria amid a rebel advance signals an overwhelming restructuring of power in a strategically vital West Asian nation. Even till 2 weeks back, the fall of Bashar al-Assad was almost unthinkable. But as the rebels started their campaign against the regime from their base in Idlib, it slowly became a reality and a turning point for Syria. On WION Wideangle this week, we explore the current situation in Syria, the history of Syria, who controls what in this tightly contested region, and what's next for Syria as the post-Assad transition begins. On the 8th of December, Syrian rebels seized the capital of Syria, Damascus. President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia. After a 13-year civil war and 6 decades of his family's rule, Moscow has given asylum to Assad and his family. Fall of Assad's government might mean a wipeout of a bastion from which Iran and Russia exercised their influence across the Arab world. It may limit Iran's ability to spread weapons to its allies and could cost Russia its Mediterranean naval base. But will it also mean the homecoming of millions of refugees scattered across Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan? Immediately after the regime's downfall, Syrians ransacked Assad's private residence in Damascus. Pictures from Assad's residence show the palatial home in a shambles, with empty cabinets, paintings, and other personal belongings scattered across floors. In one image, a man is seen attempting to take away a chandelier. In yet another, a group of people pose for a picture where Assad once lived. Reactions from Syrians since Assad's downfall reflect the deep hostility that he provoked within the country. Citizens in Damascus toppled statues of Assad's late father, Hafez al-Assad, a symbol of the regime's 50-year grip on the nation. The end of Assad's decades-long rule has also sparked widespread celebrations among Syrians in Syria and beyond.
Emotional right now. We almost don't believe that this is happening on real. We live to see this moment that Assad has left. I've read this news today in the morning, 6 a.m. that Assad has left. I didn't believe it. It's a dream that we've been dreaming for 12 years. This is not something that just happened today. He'd been killing his people for a long time.
We're really hoping for a better future. We're hoping for a better government that's going to come up, a government that cares for its civilians, a government that will not kill its civilians, of course, because what's going on has been horrible. I mean, millions of civilians have been killed. It's awful. I mean, I have family who have unfortunately perished as well. But we're very happy. We're hoping for the best for the future and for the rest of the Middle East as well.
I can't speak for all Syrian people, but I can confidently say the majority of Syrian people probably didn't think this was going to happen not even in their dream. So it's very surreal, and I think the happiness is shared amongst all Syrians all around the world.
It's unbelievable. I'm still not understand. He actually got out of the country. He flew out, and Syria's free, liberated again. So now it's our time to rebuild it and then, get a new country.
The scenes of jubilation reflect the distress created by Assad's dictatorial regime.
The Syrian people have every right to celebrate the moment that many of them have been waiting for. We're talking, and this is really the time to honor those that have been unjustly killed, those that have been violently detained. We've seen those many images of women, children, people who have been behind bars for decades and with no closure to many of their family members who thought that they were, gone. And there's also a reckoning to those that have been displaced. We're talking, let me give you some numbers, and this is key. You're talking about the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. You're talking about the biggest internal displaced population since that war as well.
Syria is home to one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. The country has valuable resources, including oil, gas, and fertile farmland. But Syria's significance goes beyond its resources. Its real power lies in its location. Syria is centrally located. It is a key crossroad between Asia, Europe, and Africa, influencing regional stability and global power dynamics. From its ancient roots to the Syrian civil war and the recent political instability, the country has had a complex and chaotic history. Modern-day Syria, a country located in West Asia on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, is one of the most ancient inhabited regions on Earth. Syria covers an area that has seen invasions over the ages, from Romans and Mongols to Crusaders and Turks. It is home to diverse ethnic and religious groups, including Kurds, Armenians, Assyrians, Christians, Druze, Alawites, Shias, and Sunnis, the last of whom make up a majority of the Muslim population. Modern Syria gained its independence from France in 1946. Between 1949 and 1971, the country had waves of political instability, with multiple military coups and coup attempts. Between 1958 and 1961, Syria briefly joined with Egypt to form the United Arab Republic. In 1963, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, which was active throughout West Asia since the late 1940s, seized power of Syria in a coup known as the Ba'ath Revolution. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel seized the Golan Heights, a rocky plateau located in southwestern Syria. Conflict over this coveted area continued for years. It goes on till this day. In 1970, Hafez al-Assad, the Syrian Minister of Defense, overthrew the de facto leader of Syria, Salah Jadid. Hafez al-Assad was part of the Islam Alawite. During his presidency, Hafez was credited with strengthening the Syrian military with the help of the Soviets. Hafez remained president for 30 years until his death in 2000. After Hafez's death in 2000, his son Bashar al-Assad inherited the presidency. At the start of his presidency, Bashar al-Assad released 600 political prisoners. Syrians grew hopeful that their new leader would grant more freedom and impose less oppression than his father. However, within a year, Bashar used threats and arrests to stop pro-reform activism. In 2002, the United States accused Syria of acquiring weapons of mass destruction and listed the nation as a member of the so-called Axis of Evil countries.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world by seeking weapons of mass destruction. These regimes pose a grave and growing danger.
After a few years of diplomacy between Assad and other nations, the United States renewed sanctions against Syria in 2010, saying the regime supported terrorist groups. Revolts in Egypt and Tunisia, which became known as the Arab Spring, broke out in early 2011. Peaceful protests also broke out in Syria and became widespread. Assad and the Syrian government responded by arresting and killing hundreds of protesters and their family members. These events, combined with other circumstances, including a flagging economy, a lack of general freedom, and a tense religious atmosphere, led to civilian resistance and ultimately an uprising. At the height of the Arab Spring, pro-democracy demonstrators took to the streets in Syria as well. When the Syrian government used deadly force to crush the dissent, protests demanding President Bashar al-Assad's resignation erupted nationwide. Syria descended into a multidimensional civil war with the involvement of different countries. As Assad's forces crushed the pro-democracy movement, an armed opposition began to form, made up of small organic militias and some defectors from the Syrian military. Hundreds of rebel groups sprung up, and it did not take long for the conflict to become more than a battle between Syrians for or against Assad. More than 6 million Syrians fled the country during that time. The opposition forces were made up of different ideologies, but the foreign powers, including neighboring Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States, unified in their common goal of toppling Assad. As the chaos worsened, they were supported by extremist organizations with their own goals, like the Islamic State group and al-Qaeda. By 2014, the extremists dominated and the ISIS started sweeping across the country. Fearing Syria would become a permanent terror hotbed, an international coalition led by the US stepped in with a focus on eliminating the group, but without confronting the Syrian regime. The Syrian Democratic Forces, a US partner made up of Kurdish fighters, fought against the ISIS, effectively ending the group's territorial existence. In 2020, Russia and Turkey agreed to a ceasefire in the last remaining opposition-held province, Idlib. There have been no major flare-ups since then, but Syria's government never regained all of its territory. But as the recent events in Syria show, armed resistance never went away. In November 2024, a coalition led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, swiftly captured several major cities, including Damascus, and toppled Assad's regime.
The crisis in Syria is really the re-eruption of a conflict that has continued since 2011, when Syrians in their hundreds of thousands protested against the Syrian regime under Bashar al-Assad. This led increasingly to peaceful protests around the country, which became more violent, not least because the Syrian regime cracked down very heavily, using lethal force against these protesters. And in turn, this started the creation of what originally was called the Free Syrian Army, but a whole host of armed opposition groups, often backed by outside states, that were determined, of course, to get rid of the Syrian regime. Now, this over a decade continued, but for the last few years, the front lines in this conflict between all these various groups had largely frozen.
Let's take a look at the territorial control of various groups in Syria. Syrian government force is the government's main military force. It fights alongside the National Defense Forces, a pro-government paramilitary group. The Syrian government troops have long controlled a large part of the country, strengthened by the allied forces dispatched by Russia and Iran. A US-led global coalition that deployed special forces in Syria in 2014 to help an alliance of Kurdish and Arab militias called the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. Since then, the SDF has battled the Islamic State group. Capturing the land held by the extremists in eastern Syria. About 900 American troops are stationed in Syria's east to guard against a resurgence by the extremist group. Turkey considers the principal Kurdish faction of the SDF to be linked to the banned Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, that it and its allies regard as a terrorist group. Anti-government forces led by the insurgent Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, was set up under a different name, Jabhat al-Nusra, in 2011 as a direct affiliate of al-Qaeda. HTS was regarded as one of the most effective and deadly of the groups ranged against President Assad. HTS was prescribed as a terrorist group by the UN, the US, Turkey, and other countries, and still remains so. But al-Julani broke ties with al-Qaeda, dissolved Jabhat al-Nusra, and set up a new organization, which took the name Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, when it merged with several other similar groups a year later. HTS controls much of northwest Syria. There's also the Syrian National Army, which is a Turkish-backed rebel force in northern Syria.
In addition to all of that, you have one of the major groups in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is listed as a terrorist group. So this then brings questions as to how to deal with the group itself has been signaling that they are willing to share power, that they have changed their ideology, and they have acted in a very disciplined way. They gave assurances to minorities in the areas they captured, but also they were able to, as I said, protect the areas, prevent violations, and signal that they could even potentially allow someone else to lead or participate in governing the areas they captured.
Renewed violence in northwest Syria has deepened one of the world's largest displacement crises. Since the civil war began in 2011, more than 13 million Syrians have been displaced. And about 7 million people were trapped inside, unable to leave. More than 4.9 million have sought refuge in neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, while another 1.3 million have found refuge in Europe. They are faced with two options: to leave everything behind and seek safety in other countries, or to stay displaced in their own shattered and battered homeland. The United Nations said that the escalation in fighting in Syria has displaced around 280,000 people since November 27, and that the numbers could swell to 1.5 million. After the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad, many Syrian refugees are eager to return to their homeland, braving the cold, draped in blankets and coats. Hundreds of refugees arrive at Turkey's Silbegozu and Onkupinar border gates. Authorities set up a checkpoint allowing Syrians with suitable documentation to advance to the border gate. Among those waiting at Silvagozu was 27-year-old Mohammed el-Mubuhar, who fled Damascus in 2018 and has been living and working in Turkey.
I came here 6 years ago and have been working. But now that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is gone, I decided to go back immediately. We are going to go back now, but it's a little difficult. The line isn't moving. My family is there in Syria and I will meet them. We are happy Assad is gone. There is no more torture. God willing, Syria will be better.
Another refugee at the Onkupinar border gate, Mustafa Sultan, says he is going to Syria to find his older brother.
I came to Turkey in 2015. Right now, thank God, the war is over. Assad is over. My older brother was in prison. I haven't seen him for 13 years. The prisons have been emptied, so I'm going to go see whether he's alive. I don't know if he is. I will go to Damascus and take a look.
Hundreds of displaced Syrians who fled to neighboring Lebanon years ago also returned home. They seem determined to rebuild their lives back home in Syria, despite economic hardship, harsh winter, and threat of renewed violence.
I have no intention of going to Lebanon. I always wanted to return home. This is our homeland. Whatever happens, we will stay. We can't forsake our country as it needs us now, so we will not quit on it.
Similar stories of determination abound among other returnees. Qatar, a mother of 5 who fled Lebanon, is struggling to make ends meet with no income besides aid.
This is our homeland and our house. We decided to repair our house and stay here. My children want to come back to join the military and serve their country. We hope to get assistance to repair our house so that my children can return and live here. What we need now is safety, and we want our country to become safe like it used to be.
As refugees from Syria's long civil war are making their way back home, a new interim Prime Minister, Mohammed al-Bashir, has been appointed with the backing of the rebels who toppled President Bashar al-Assad. Bashir will lead the interim authority until March 1st. Born in 1983, Bashir ran the HTS-led Salvation government before the 12-day lightning rebel offensive swept into Damascus. He had previously held the role of development minister. Set up in 2017, the Salvation government has its own ministers, departments, and judicial and security authorities who assisted people in the rebel-held area cut off from government services. It has since begun rolling out assistance in Aleppo, the first major city to fall on the 27th of November. Meanwhile, the Biden administration says that the U.S. will support the new Syrian government that renounces terrorism and protects the rights of minorities and women. Despite the support from the United States, Syria is threatened by Israel's onslaught of attacks. On the 10th of December, Israel carried out a wave of heavy airstrikes across Syria as its troops advanced deeper into the country. Israeli military said it had carried out more than 480 strikes in Syria, hitting most of the strategic weapons stockpiles in the country to stop them from falling into the hands of extremists. Israel has a long history of seizing territory during wars with its neighbors and occupying it indefinitely, citing security concerns. Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria in the 1967 Mideast War and annexed it in a move not recognized internationally except by the United States. So what's next for Syria? With Assad's departure marking the end of an oppressive era, the journey to rebuild Syria will be fraught with challenges. Restoring Syria into a steady form will be a colossal task. It remains to be seen how rebel leaders and international players will navigate this volatile transition to restore stability and address the humanitarian crisis that emerged in the wake of the civil war in Syria.